So now we get into revoking um, the nobility's autonomy. Now, the French nobility had held significant autonomy, and they were, for the most part, untouchable to most of the kings and queens. Louis XIV proved that it was not impossible by basically forcing the nobles to answer directly to him with one creation, one piece of art. This piece of art was the Palace of Versailles. Basically, to achieve total control and remove noble autonomy, he constructed this palace. Now, this mansion would serve as the new place for the government affairs. As I stated before, Louis could not rule from Paris, not after the Fawn, not after all the stuff that had happened there and the um, mental scarring that had happened. He needed a new place, and he decided Versailles was a great place. It was only a few miles outside of Paris, and it stood as a symbol of French monarchical power, right? And it was a massive piece of Baroque art, which was a popular artistic movement that was going on at the time. And this was mainly due to its walls being filled with Baroque art. Um, I hate to say it, it did also almost bankrupt France. At one point, upwards to two-thirds of the economy was dedicated solely to this palace. So it was a major undertaking, but it completely worked. The palace served many purposes for Louis XIV. It brought the government out of Paris, because the Fronde. It decreased the autonomy of the nobles. This was done by all the nobles now being forced to go to his palace. And this overbearing wealth basically made the nobles realize just how little power they had. And thus they had to try to gain Louis XIV's favor. And they basically put him as the sole person to hold any power. And it removed any autonomy that they once had. You had to come to Louis XIV's palace if you wanted any help from the French nobility or monarchy. But the domestic policies was not the only thing Louis XIV is known for. He declared a great number of wars. One of these wars was known as the War of Devolution in 1666 to 1668. This war was between France and the Netherlands. Louis XIV wanted the glory of war to come to France, right? Thus, he had chosen what he believed to be an easy victory. This was not the case, because the Dutch had found allies in time to save them, mainly Great Britain. And this was not how the propaganda presented the war, though. They showed it as a glorious battle for the French. They also claimed that it was a great and decisive victory, and it really was not the case because there was fairly small concessions on the Dutch side. But that's not how propaganda painted it. As we can see, we have Louis XIV here riding the stallion into battle, riding his way into war, all to seek the glory of war. A more consequential war was the War of Spanish Secession, right? And this was one of the last wars of Louis's reign, and he attempted to take control of Spain. The war was devastating and costly for the French. Taxes were raised and levies were conscripted. The French army reached up to 400,000 strong. What had happened was the Spanish Habsburgs were losing power. So Louis XIV tried to establish himself on the throne, or at least somebody of his family. The war ended with a compromise. Louis did not get the throne of Spain, but his grandson did, and this effectively secured an alliance for France. And it's pretty significant because it shifts the balance of power away from the Habsburgs that had encircled France